the important questions we need to ask ourselves is, as we're building this, if we look back 20, 30, 100 years from now, will we be proud of the architecture we, as people in this room, have built? Will it stand the test of time? Will people be actually able to live and interact and work in what we've built? Or will it be overly complex, overly fragile, and overly dependent on the people who are sitting here in this room? And I'll be very honest with you, I've been in this industry professionally for the last 5 years, and that is my biggest worry, is this room's gotten a little bigger, but it hasn't gotten big enough. There's a lot going on in our community. There's a lot happening in crypto. Generally, there's a lot happening here. There are a lot of interesting teams announcing new things here. But I've kind of been going back and thinking about why. Like, why are we doing all of this? What is the point? Why? And that's been sort of a defining question for me over the last 5 years that I've been in this industry is why? Why are we doing this? And so what I wanted to think about today is the unintended consequences of architecture. Architecture being how we build things, how we build structures, and what that says about us as a group of people, what that does to our society, and what that means for the future of what's possible. So hopefully that sounds interesting. This is a little bit metaphysical. It's summer, I had a lot of free time, I've been reading a lot, I've been reading some really weird shit, so hopefully you're into it. Disclaimer, you can read it, none of this is investment advice. Okay, so everybody knows what this is, right? Yes? This is Machu Picchu. So I'm going to show you some pictures of architectural feats from human history. And as you know, archaeology and the study of structures is an important part of figuring out who we are as humans and why our society looks the way it does and what happened thousands of years ago that has led us to the point we're at today. We're sitting in this beautiful building in Berlin. Berlin is an interesting city in and of itself. How did we get to this point? So buildings and structures, really what they are is they're social and cultural products that we create. They're influenced by ideas, by values, by relationships, by constraints, right? So Machu Picchu was built out of a set of constraints, out of the materials that were available to these people, the tools they had, the knowledge they had of how to build structures. All of these things influenced how civilizations developed over time. Societies produced buildings and structures and architecture, and in the past that was physical. But what we're trying to build here, everyone in this room, we're trying to build architecture for a new world that is digital. And so I want to talk about the questions we should be asking ourselves as we build this architecture. So we produce these structures as a society, as a group of people, and although buildings themselves and structures themselves don't produce our culture, they have a really important impact on how it's sustained and how it forms. Because if we design things a certain way, they make certain things possible or not possible. And so we're going to talk about that. So hopefully that sounds fun. Some of you look excited, some of you look very bored. We'll get there. Okay, so this is Machu Picchu. Everybody knows what this is, right? The Colosseum. And the Colosseum actually represents two really interesting things. It's an innovative breakthrough in engineering. The structure of the arch was first perfected with the Colosseum, and it was an engineering marvel that had not been possible before. New tools and techniques were used in constructing it. But it's also a relic today that when you visit it, captures the cruelty and the power of the Roman Empire at its pinnacle, right? So innovative new construction techniques enable a new type of architecture. And now it's come to represent a moment in history that we look at in a mix of both awe and disgust. This, Japan, right? This is the Tsushima Shrine. And it reflects something very different. It reflects harmony and respect for nature and natural vistas. Very different. We look at this. Do people know what this is? This is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, right? So Bilbao is a port city in Brazil. Before this museum was built, Bilbao was sort of run down. It was a dwindling port city. And this museum actually revitalized that city, put it back on the map. But also this building is unique because Frank Gehry, the architect, utilized CAD drawings and a new type of architectural planning for the first time. And unlike most architectural marvels, this building was completed on time and under budget. Pretty interesting. Unique set of constraints lead to innovative new solutions that combine technology, but also respect for the local culture and the local space. And then lastly, this. This is my least favorite building in the world because I think it's terrifying. Maybe I'm afraid of heights. This is the Burj Khalifa, right? And this is something very different. This is a monument to the excesses of wealth and the desire for power, right? So all of these things, they're buildings, but they're reflections on the societies that are building them. And this building, the Burj, is only made possible through advances in architecture and engineering. So you're sitting here and you're going, what the heck, Meltem? Why are you talking about buildings? This is a crypto event. We're talking about Web3 and the future of the internet. We're getting there. Okay, so there's two quotes I want to start with from two very different people. Has anyone here heard of the Pritzker Prize? Anyone? So it's kind of like the Nobel Prize for architecture. And the reason I think it's so interesting is because of this quote. And I already alluded to this a bit, but it's basically that architecture is really a reflection of society and culture. And I think that's something we as technologists and people who live in the world of all things crypto sometimes don't think about. And then the second one is actually from someone who I think is especially interesting, Virgil Abloh. He's a designer. He leads menswear at Louis Vuitton, but he started his career and was trained as an architect. He then teamed up with Kanye West and produced a lot of his music and did a lot of his creative design. But what Virgil Abloh talks about a lot, and he had a great interview in Architectural Digest, is about how design actually has profound implications on the set of possibilities for a society. So design in its nature is civic. Because if we build something, it doesn't just impact us in this room, it doesn't just impact me or you, it impacts everything around it. Government, politics, society, groups, everything. And so when we think about what we're doing here, I think sometimes we have a very narrow lens on what we're doing and its impact, when in fact design and architecture and how we build touches everything around us. Okay, so we talked about the metaphysical, so hopefully I've given you a peek into the things going on in my mind. So what are we building? These are the times we're living in. There are three really major drivers that I think are a reflection of what we're building today. Trust. We don't trust anymore. Populism, trade wars, growing societal unrest, abuses of power, the balkanization of society, both physically, as we saw through events like Brexit, as well as digitally through the increasing balkanization of the internet. A generational shift is happening. We, people in this room, are a reflection of that. But the largest generational wealth transfer in human history is underway. Entitlements around the world are failing. Inequality is rising. And millennials are facing lifelong indebtedness in many economies. And lastly, disruption. We're seeing a fundamental shift in how business models are architected that are reducing friction, lowering barriers, and making things that were not possible before possible. And so in my view, what we're doing is really a reflection of the larger social, political, and economic forces that are shaping our society. So here's what we're living through, a paradigm shift, right? But anyways, what we're focused on here is really a paradigm shift, and there's two shifts I want to talk about today. The first is the shift from physical to digital, right? Most of what we interact with today is physical. It has materiality, it has substance. I have a phone, I have paper money in my wallet, we are physical bodies, we're sitting here in a room, we're physical. But a lot of what we're trying to build and the value we're creating in our community is digital, and that's an important shift. The second shift that I'm going to talk about is shifting from dependent assets to being fully independent, which has never existed before. It's a fundamental innovation in how systems work. Can I get an update on slides? Working it? Okay. I'll just stand for and tap dance. Is anyone in here an architect out of curiosity? Any architects? No? One? Yes, I see you. That's great. We need more architects. They know what's going on here. All right. Well, I'll just launch into it. I know what I'm going to talk about. The slides are really pretty, but I'll proceed without them. So look, in the 1980s, I come from the world of capital markets. I started my career in the commodities business. In the 1980s, most of what humans traded in markets was physical in nature. If you traded a barrel of oil, you actually settled with a physical barrel of oil, or you sold a paper contract that represented an underlying barrel of oil. Real estate is highly physical. It's denoted by physical paperwork. Equities are physical. They've been dematerialized in the last 20 years, but share certificates are physical in nature. Yeah. So here's what I want to map out, and I think I still have the wrong slides. All right, well, you know what? We can make blockchains. We can't make slides that work, apparently, so we'll go with it. But look, here's the paradigm shift I want to map out. On the x-axis, what I wanted to do is represent that first shift I talked about, which is going from physical to digital. And then the other thing I wanted to map out is going from things that are independent, meaning abstracted from the medium or marketplace in which they exist, to things that are fully dependent on the medium, marketplace, or some type of counterparty. All right, we'll go through this. So here's where we started out. 1982, most assets in the world were physical in nature, and they were highly dependent in some cases, but for the large part, really independent, right, of a medium. So if you wanted to trade oil, you could do that without going to a marketplace or counterparty. There were people you knew and networks you did that in, but it was pretty independent. Then we go to 1992, right, and what we started to see is a shift from physical to digital. So things are kind of moving along that physical to digital axis, but for the first time, we saw the precursor to what could potentially become something like cryptocurrencies, a fully digital and fully independent set of assets, domain names. Does anyone remember marketplaces for domain names? Yes. Did anyone dabble in domain names? I have. I did not make any money because I'm terrible at knowing what people want when it comes to these things. Okay, then we go to 2002. I grew up playing video games. I was not cool. I had lots of LAN parties as a teenager. But game assets, right? They were fully digital, but they were dependent. They were highly dependent on the games in which they existed. And they were also an interesting precursor, right? Mt. Gox was Magic the Gathering Exchange. Still the wrong slides. So 2012, really what we saw was the emergence of the first fully digital, first fully independent asset, Bitcoin, right? That was 2009, and in 2012 it captured my attention. I was like, what is happening here? This is insane. Because if we think about the shift we've gone through over the last 20 years, everything that was physical and largely independent has become digital, but in the process of becoming digital has become highly dependent on intermediaries and marketplaces, and as a result, we as people have lost much of our agency when we interact with these things. If I want to send email today, there's a 90% chance that my email is going to hit Google servers at some point. If I want to interact with my friends, I'm probably going to touch Facebook at some point. I myself deleted Facebook, but it's very difficult for me to keep in touch with people if I don't have Facebook or Instagram, and I also can't get away from using WhatsApp, and that's a Facebook product. If I think about interacting with a device, I own probably, gosh, a half dozen Apple devices. Many of you are on these right now. Many of us have iPhones or Apple laptops. Like, we're controlled by these intermediaries that have helped our digital lives become easier. But in the process, what they've also done is this. Has anyone ever seen the Wizard of Oz, the movie? Yes? We're going to do some pop culture references. Okay. So in The Wizard of Oz, they're going on their magical journey. It's really fun. They're walking around along the yellow brick road. And they get to this point where they see a man behind a curtain who's manipulating all these switches and dials. And what we have today in our society is there's a man behind the curtain. And there's a central coordinator, there's a central group of entities that control everything we do see, interact with. They designed our architecture. They control it, they decide how it gets built, how it changes, how it evolves. The man behind the curtain controls everything we do. And all of the things that feel like innovation to us are really just abstraction layers that are wrapped around the same thing we've had for the last 50 years, if not the last 100 years. there hasn't been a fundamental shift in how markets and market architecture works. That's crazy. How is that not crazy? Like, everyone looks very calm right now. Are we all accepting our dystopian future? Is that what's going on? I am not calm about that. That is fucked up, people. No, that is not up. Okay. So now we're asking ourselves, how do we design a new system? Right? The idea that was introduced by Bitcoin. What does the world look like when we don't need to trust intermediaries and these large corporations and governments that decide what architecture we get to build on? What does the world look like if we are the architects? What does it look like? It started with Bitcoin. That's what got me into all of this. And this is a great piece of art by Crypto Graffiti. He's an awesome artist who makes lots of cool stuff like this. I'm into it. It's a little dorky. All right, we'll see. And what I think is so cool, here's a quote from my friend Elaine Yu. Financial institutions for so long, and markets and all these intermediaries, they've made people feel safe because they hide complexity. They take all of the hard stuff, all the architecture, the engineering, the things that go into constructing things, and they hide it. Crypto flips that on its head. It says, hey, we're going to put all this risk front and center. Private keys. Oh, you got to deal with that. Technical consensus. Got to deal with that. And we brag about it on the internet. I think that's pretty cool. That's a fundamental shift. The problem is that right now the only people who think that's cool are in this room right here, right? So we have to make all these other people think that what we're doing is really cool and is worth doing. I have no idea what's going to come next in these slides, by the way, because this is still not the right version, so you're going to see with me what the adventure is. All right, it's fine. Okay, so here's what's happening, right? All of this value in our world has historically been physical or digital, but it's been highly dependent on intermediaries. So the $250 trillion of real estate in our world, it's highly physical, and it's still really dependent on intermediaries, laws, marketplaces, brokers, controlled networks. More importantly, these assets that have become digitized, these are also dependent, highly dependent on marketplaces, intermediaries who decide who gets to do what. They have control, and if they don't like what's happening, all you have to do is make one phone call and it stops. What we're doing is decidedly different, but what we're doing is teeny tiny. Other markets are taking notice. They want to borrow some of what we have, and they want to build some of the architecture we have, but in a way that allows them to retain control. And all of us are getting excited about all of these things, believing that they're blockchain and it's good. It's not. Because the architecture is no different. And I think one of the important questions we need to ask ourselves is, as we're building this, if we look back 20, 30, 100 years from now, will we be proud of the architecture we, as people in this room, have built? Will it stand the test of time? Will people be actually able to live and interact and work in what we've built? Or will it be overly complex, overly fragile, and overly dependent on the people who are sitting here in this room? And I'll be very honest with you, I've been in this industry professionally for the last 5 years, and that is my biggest worry, is this room's gotten a little bigger, but it hasn't gotten big enough. And for this to work, it has to get really, really, really big, and we need a lot of architects, and we don't have enough. All right, these are random slides. I don't have anything I prepared for you, but what I was going to show you, I'll give you this blank slide instead, is a picture of one of the largest demolitions in all of human history, and I'll close sort of my thoughts with this. So in the 1950s in St. Louis, I'll go back to the idea of actual physical architecture. The first modernist architect was commissioned to build a housing complex for St. Louis's low-income population. St. Louis at that time had a lot of issues with homelessness and rising wealth inequality, and so they commissioned this architect to build a set of 33 buildings that was going to house over 100,000 people. And these were called the Pruitt-Idaho Apartments. Now these buildings were built by this very notorious architect, very famous, went to all the right schools, got all the right degrees, all the right awards. But this architect did something interesting. They didn't actually build the buildings for the people living in them. They didn't really think about what these people were going through, what their day-to-day was like. They built these buildings to win architectural prizes, to use all sorts of cool engineering and all sorts of cool concepts and do something new and innovative. But they never actually thought about the people that would live in these buildings. And so for the next 10 years, this building complex became one of the most phenomenal failures of architecture ever. It was crime-ridden, in a state of constant disrepair, and within 10 years, over half of the people who had been moved into these buildings, you're shaking your head, you know this story, they were forced to leave because it was so bad. And not 15 years later, they blew the whole thing up because it had been a phenomenal and colossal failure. And I don't want that to happen to what we're doing. And so as architects, what we need to do is to build thoughtfully, to build with end use and design in mind, but most importantly, to build with empathy for the end user. Because the stuff we are making is really complex. It's more layered than ever. There's so many different layers of architecture you have to work through, and it's very confusing. And what people like, we're humans. We don't like change. We don't like difficult things. We have to make it easy, and we have to make the complex look simple and beautiful. So this is my thesis. Come find me. We'd love to talk to you about architecture, complexity, and the esoteric. Have a fun Web3. I will see you all next time. I will have slides. I will post them on the internet, though, so you can enjoy my beautiful pictures. Thanks, guys.